Good evening, everybody. Mr. Harshpati Singhania, Ms. Preetha Reddy, Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, Dr. Trehan, who I hope will be joining us very shortly. He's having some trouble with technology, and it's always the case when we have something important happening. It's a pleasure to have you all with us today, and a very warm welcome to you all for a special session on India's health emergency and delivering vaccines to all Indians. AIMA is pleased to partner Horasis as a co-organizer of the Horasis India Meeting and delighted that we are able to host this special AIMA session during the India meeting. For many years, this meeting has been held at exotic locations all over the world, and all of us who have had a great time networking and interacting with people we know and also make many new friends over the conference weekend. But COVID has isolated and confined us. Thanks to vaccination, the world is slowly beginning to regain confidence in travel and in physical meetings. It was heartening to see crowds back at the Wimbledon and the Euro. Hopefully, we will be able to get together soon. India has responded to the shock of the April-May COVID spike by raising the rate of vaccinations and increasing the availability of the vaccine. The government's decision to increase orders for vaccines and permit vaccine imports should improve its supply, and its decision to fully subsidize the vaccination of 3/4 of the population should encourage more people to avail of the free vaccine. The availability of more kinds of vaccines through multiple channels should speed up vaccination in India. However, with COVID variants cropping up, there may be still the need to follow up with the jabs. We have an outstanding panel to discuss the challenge of vaccinating more than 1 billion Indians in a rush and building India's healthcare capacity to avoid the kind of situation that the country had faced during COVID's second wave. Now, there is a talk of a third wave, which is only adding to the anxiety. However, in the absence of therapies to cure COVID, mass vaccination is the only ticket out of lockdowns and self-imposed confinement. I'm pleased to introduce a very distinguished panel to you today who will be debating this topic. Mr. Harshpati Singhania, welcome to the panel. You lead one of India's largest manufacturing groups, and your business has experienced the healthcare crisis both in production and in the market. Many thanks for joining us today. Preetha, many thanks for agreeing to join the discussion. As the leader of the Apollo Hospitals Group, you have been at the center of the COVID storm all along. Your hospitals have been on the front line of treating COVID infections and administering vaccines. Thank you so much for sparing time. I know it's a very busy time for you, and a very warm welcome to you. I hope Dr. Trehan will be able to join us after he sorts out his technical issues. He is, of course, one of the best-known cardiovascular and thoracic surgeons, and also the founder of a modern world-class healthcare chain. And now I welcome our moderator, Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, who is well known to everybody. Mr. Munjal, always a pleasure to have you with us. As a leading entrepreneur and investor, you have been vocal about the need for rapid containment of COVID and the need for involving the private sector in expanding the reach of the vaccination program. Thank you for joining us. A very warm welcome to you. And with these words, let me hand over the session to Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rekha. And as we're all aware, it is now well proven that the only real shield we have against the continuous battering that we have got from this pandemic is the vaccine. So rightfully, country after country is putting out ambitious targets in how quickly they will vaccinate their entire population, starting first with their adult population. India too had put out a target of 950 million people getting vaccinated by the end of this year. It is a very ambitious target, and it requires for us to be able to vaccinate 7 million people a day. Our current record is not quite at 7 million right now. At an average, I think we would be between 4.5 to 5 million or so. We have had better days, we've had worse days, but I think there is some work for us to do, both on the side of supply in terms of ramping up the manufacturing capacity and capabilities, availability, and making it accessible to people, improving the information system. In effect, if you look at what the first wave and the second wave taught us, there were lessons for us there. There were lessons for us which showed us that we need to build a better rural healthcare infrastructure, for one. Second, that the training is the key in this. How do you manage this right from the first stage? What do you do? And more importantly, what do you not do? You don't over-medicate, only medicate where required. How do you isolate people? How do you trace them? How do you track them? So there are a whole host of learnings that need to be transmitted in easily digestible modules. So training has become the key, and institutions like Preetha's and a few others have done an amazing job, but still not enough for of our scale, size, and diversity. We have to ramp this up. I think the third lesson was in technology. It is critical and imperative that we make active use of technology going forward in equipping ourselves better. I think the fourth message was that the collective effort is transformative. No one of us by ourselves can do what needs to get done. We need to supplement each other's efforts and create a multiplier effect on this. And I think the last message that I would like to give to all of us ourselves is we need to make a permanent change in how we look at health and healthcare systems for the nation, and more particularly public health. So I'm going to stop here, and I had a few other if I get the chance also, I'd rather listen to the experts here. Let me start with you, Preetha. After the second wave, lots of institutions in India said, we're going to add beds here, we are going to add beds there, capacity is being enhanced, oxygen capacity got enhanced. But is enough being done to train people to actually use this effectively? I have a call coming in from Naresh, Trehan. I guess he's trying to log on. Preetha, while you answer, I'm going to take this.
Okay, sounds good. So I just want to know from a COVID perspective, from within Apollo, which has about 15,000 beds, we went from 0 to about 4,500 in terms of COVID bed capacity, and across the country, across the network. What helped here was linking them up with technology, getting protocols which were best in class globally, and being able to track so that the outcomes were on par with anywhere in the world. So I think that really helped. From a skilling perspective, we realized that we just do not have enough skilled manpower. There was fatigue in the second wave, which also had to be dealt with. So online training, one of our entities is called Medvarsity, and Medvarsity quickly turned out programs which people could use the e-learning platform, and 200,000 people throughout the country were trained on ventilation usage, to become vaccinators, to see that the protocols were common and they could have been shared. Even something as simple as just how you deal with infection control. So we brought out what was called within our system the Red Book, but we shared it widely with healthcare providers which were not only part of the Apollo ecosystems, but there were small hospitals with 100 beds, 200 bed hospitals. So they had a ready-made handbook of systems, and that really helped from the from the shortfall in skilling, from the shortfall in not knowing what to do. So I think it was a multi-pronged effort. In fact, the government picked up our e-learning modules and platform, whether it was ventilator training or multiple others, and then the government kind of used it, which was in UP, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra. So I think everyone came together to do what they had to do, and that has been a great learning.
Since you raised government, let me ask Harsh a question on government. Since the government has been the main driver of the entire rollout of the response to COVID, do you believe, Harsh, and you'll have to unmute yourself, do you believe that the government could prioritize this a little bit differently from what they have done? Could larger, more crowded, busier, higher risk areas, geographical areas get addressed first? Is that a possibility? Or is there any other method which will be followed other than what we are currently doing to be more effective?
So, Sunil, I think there were huge learnings, particularly from the second wave, even from the first wave, but the second wave in particular, for the government and also for everybody else. So one was, how do you manage from basic things? Citizens wanted to know, for example, is there a bed available? When we face the issue of oxygen and medicines, are those things available? And then there were certain portals and apps. I know in Delhi, I mean, we run a hospital as well in Delhi, and the government in Delhi had come out with a portal. Now, there were time lags, and it's very difficult to put it together and have a perfect system. Right? There's a lot of learning along the way. One of the key things to my mind, the way we look at it in terms of government response, is going to be close working between the central and state governments. Because as you know, initially the central government was the repository of vaccines and they were giving it to states, and then later on they decentralized it, and that actually made things worse, quite frankly. So, and then the center took it back. So close working between center and states is one major understanding. The second is in terms of how vaccines are actually distributed. So at times, when there were issues around seemingly non-availability of vaccines, it was often to do more with the, unevenness of the distribution chain rather than the actual vaccine not being available. There were also, as Preetha said, a lot of learnings from hospitals as to how do you deal with the inputs, how much should you keep in advance, and what should you do. So that is one. Your specific area, Sunil, in terms of saying what should the protocol be, etc. I think, look, we have already moved to a situation where government has said, and rightly so, that anybody who's 18 plus ought to be vaccinated. So I think the whole focus right now should be more in terms of seeing how many, as you said in your initial remarks, how can we accelerate that process? Because once open, everybody is vulnerable. Whether it's 18 or 45 or 60 plus or senior citizens, everybody is vulnerable. And as we say, or as they say world over, you are not safe till everybody is safe.
Correct.
So that's where I would pause on this one.
So the unevenness is still going on. By the way, there are still states right now which have faced run out or near run out of inventory of vaccines. Whereas in some other states, we've had spillage because they were just lying around and not getting consumed. So clearly there is some work to do there. And I hope and wish that the private sector can play a more active role in supporting that initiative to creating higher efficiency wherever feasible and practical. On the fringe of this, there is another funny thing that has happened. Since the government announced full free access to vaccines, what was being deployed in the private sector didn't quite come to a complete halt, but it got completely squeezed. Even people who could afford it said, oh, I'm going to wait for the free one. I think we need to encourage people to go and pay, those who can, to pay and get this used. I want to come back to you, Preetha, to a comment you made about health workers. I think that was very critical, very important that you have trained people, you have offered training protocols to others. Are all your teams, and you believe others in the healthcare system, now I'm not talking only about your hospitals, do you think they themselves are fully protected and vaccinated?
Music off. So, Sunil, within our system, we have this underlying rule that you have to gently mandate things. In the first run of the vaccine, there were a lot of the younger nurses who, because they were so frightened about the vaccination, and they really refused. So that's where a lot of communication, a lot of advice had to go into telling them that they need to vaccinate. So I think within our system, I would very comfortably say that we're almost on 89 to 90% vaccinated. Why do we still have that 10%? Is sometimes they just go, they're still on our rolls, they haven't shown up. So I don't think we can ever reach 100%. But I'm quite confident that we've reached 90%, but it was a lot of hard work.
Yeah, I completely agree. What we did in our places, in all our offices, factories, workplaces, we actually said only somebody who is fully vaccinated can come in.
So that's the entry mandate.
So exactly. So we went and did that. Then we suggested the same thing to our suppliers, to our distributors. So just kind of spreading the message. And we said, it's not just you. It's your families and those around you who also need to be vaccinated. Only then we would consider you fully vaccinated. So, so Harsh, let me ask you a question about supplies of the vaccine. Why do you think some of the manufacturers are finding it easier to ramp up capacity, while the others are still struggling? Is
Well,
there anything that can be done to ramp up where they are still behind?
see, my understanding, Sunil, is this. One is that in the beginning, we only had really two manufacturers in India, the Serum Institute, and we had Bharat Biotech. Now, the Bharat Biotech had a limited capacity comparatively to begin with, and Serum had the larger, and they had capacity, etc. So, and now we have more people from the private sector who have come in. It's going. You have to start with a smaller capacity. So that's one part of the problem. The other issue, I think, which is innate in that, is also the see. You mentioned about spoilage as well in some states. Now, as we know, these vaccines are at a certain temperature and certain ambient conditions, or non-ambient conditions, quite frankly, in which these have to be transported and moved. Now, if there isn't any predictability or certainty in terms of how the front end demand is going to come, it becomes very difficult to do planning. And I believe that that was one of the issues that did come up on a practical basis when for the whole manufacturing thing. Then we also had, as far as foreign vaccines are concerned, and Preetha would know more about it, you would know more about it, there was this entire issue about, first of all, the hesitancy in terms of importing it, and then once it was clear, some of the conditionalities along with that. So all that. So now I suppose as we speak today, we ought to be in a much better, or we are, I would say, in a much better place compared to what we were at that point in time. Let's not also forget that the suddenness and the alarming rate at which wave 2 hit us also, rendered most parts of the system unprepared. So one point that you made, Sunil, was that it's very important to sort of remember, document, learn from what we have learned. Because whichever way you talk about a possible wave 3, we shouldn't commit those errors again. May I add one additional point, Sunil, to what you and Preetha were talking about earlier on in terms of vaccination? And I think private sector has a very important job in being able to help in this whole process. So, for example, like you mentioned, both of you mentioned, in our group also, across JK organization, we've had right now, I suppose it's about 75% plus of all our employees, and I mean workers down right to the workman level, who have been vaccinated. And if you look at a double shot coverage, I think there's about 23 or 24% who've been covered. Now, one of the other reasons, by the way, as you know, is that if contractually, regulatorily, if you had COVID, you've got to wait for perhaps 3 months before you're eligible for a vaccine. So some people who have been left out, perhaps as Preetha was saying, could also be a result of that.
Yeah, but there's an interesting silver lining to all this, and you're right in saying this is a surprise. Of course, the whole attack on humanity was a surprise in some sense. But what people did, which shows such an amazing entrepreneurial spirit. There are 104 COVID-19 vaccine candidates currently undergoing clinical trials, and 184 at preclinical development at this stage. Never before in history has the medical system, the pharmaceutical system, the entire research and manufacturing system responded with this speed and alacrity. Of course, many of these were candidates which were not purpose-built for this, because this was not known. They were modified from other uses or midway to using making something else. That demonstrates to us that we can actually do a lot more than we imagine we can. If we are a bit more innovative, if we are a bit more thoughtful, and we actually apply ourselves, we have been able to do that. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves, Preetha, is why are we finding things like gender disparity even in vaccination? Why do you think this is happening?
So if you take within the older system or any healthcare system, you won't find gender disparity. Because,
I would certainly not hope not.
so most of our,
It's sports and ladies leading this. Yeah.
yeah. But 38% of Indian women, for instance, own a smartphone, as against much more of the male population. So I think there itself there's a reason why I think you just find more men coming. Also, it's in the rural areas. So communication, mandating, focus in the rural areas is still there's a long road ahead. And that's why you're seeing that dichotomy and that percentage. And 65% of Indian population is in the rural area. So that's where you see this large gap. And the fact remains that we still haven't taken vaccination to people's homes. They still have to come to a center. So the women are still not as mobile as they should be. So unless we take vaccination to where people live, to people's homes, maybe to the economically weaker section, we're not going to be able to get that gap bridged. And to do that, these are certain steps, which is communication, which is logistics to take the vaccination where it has to go, which again give them access to smartphones if you can, and more than anything else, rural India. So I think these were the reasons why we're seeing that gender disparity.
Yeah, absolutely. And in countries like the US, you can walk into any pharmacy and anyone can get vaccination. You don't even need to be pre-registered or anything.
Yeah.
So clearly we are some distance away from getting there. But what do you think, Preetha, that private sector can actually do to help the entire system move forward quantum leap from where we are?
So I really think that private sector has to do much more than what they're doing. Let me say, for example, I'm using my organization because I'm just working here day in and day out. We've done more than 2.1 million people. So if one organization can do that, private sector altogether can do 100 times more.
Yep.
So we should be able to do that. We strengthened our cold chain supply so that the delivery is seamless. Can we have better delivery systems? Cold chain supplies, work with other agencies. I think we need to do that, which is also important. Again, vaccine infrastructure. While networks have their infrastructure, it's still not available in, let's say, a pharmacy chain, for example. You can't really do it because we haven't had permissions to do that. So those permissions have to come. We are saying, and there's the NGOs, there's the Rotary. Everybody wants to take vaccinations in large vehicles, in a truck, park it there, finish it, come out. But still, permissions are hard. So on one side, you've got vaccine spoilage. On the other side, you don't have permission to really go and deliver vaccines. So I think that's where there's a huge paradox, so there's a gap, and that gap needs to be bridged. And while we're trying as one organization, I think everybody needs to work really hard on that.
So let me expand that question for you, Harsh. What do you think are the roles that both government and the private sector need to play in removing the current gaps in the healthcare system, in the overall healthcare system in India, and more particularly in the healthcare delivery system?
So let me first preface something else before I actually respond to your question. If I put it very simply, from a private sector perspective, or even from our entire economy perspective, we know the impact COVID has had on the economy. I mean, even if we grow at higher rates, we would have essentially been 2 years behind. I mean, give or take the math. Lots of people have lost jobs, which are running into millions of numbers, right? So, and from the private sector also, it will work only if there's demand, whether you talk manufacturing, whether you talk services and everything. So frankly, that is the preface I wanted to give in terms of saying that it is in the self-interest of the private sector and the whole country for that matter, to see that we are able to do this as quickly as we can. Now, in addition to what Preetha and you've also talked about in terms of the private sector, see, one part is to propagate the fact that this is essential. And private sector also has a lot of reach to rural areas because you sell in rural areas, you have manufacturing units in rural areas, you have supply chains. So across the chain, the private sector can sort of advocate that vaccination is important, vital, and good for you, and try and remove some of that hesitancy because that is coming from the mindset issue. Number two, private sector's outreach to the communities beyond their own workplaces. And today the government has allowed CSR spending, for example, to be used for this, right? So it's not a matter of, how much money will be spent. So that is available. So the entire concentric circle is being widened. The third is, as Preetha suggested, that can we in the private sector also propagate technology usage in sending this down into deep rural areas. So for example, suppose there is a particular area where we have some beachhead, some organization. From there, can we link to other hospitals, other people who are at some other towns, and also then the supply chain and infrastructure in terms of saying, okay, can the private sector get vehicles to actually physically get those vaccines down to those particular areas. Now, the one key point is working closely with the local administration in the country. And our own experience has been that actually it is the DM, the district magistrate, who is the key person. And they also, frankly, have a job to do. So they are also very keen that in their sort of areas, there is a maximum, fastest rollout. So the private sector needs to work very closely with them. It doesn't need to get towards, the top person at the state or at, or even in the center. You really need to do a very tight working with the local administration, see what their needs are, where do they want more vaccination to be done based on statistics, and we move forward with that.
Since you spoke of the economy, let me just step aside a little bit. It is well known that small industry, cottage industry has borne the brunt of the slowdown. Of course, barring some large companies in specific industries like travel, hospitality, etc. By and large, it's been small and mid-size. We have often said that in 2 years, India will get back to some kind of normal where it was 2 years earlier. Do you believe that is true also for small industry?
Absolutely. Sunil, you hit a very important point. See, statistically speaking, India's per capita real private final consumption has come down to a level that it was 3 years ago. And there are various estimates, but there has been one estimate which says that almost 2.27 crore jobs have been lost in the second wave. Now, these are frightening numbers, and it's particularly so in a country where we want to produce, 1 million jobs a month, etc., to add to that. And one of the things that I would believe, and you would know as well, Sunil, being involved with various chambers and other associations, that the data we get is largely from the formal, organized, larger sector, call it whatever you will. So actually, it's also difficult to estimate the real impact, both in terms of jobs as well as on an economic front, in terms of, rupees, lakhs or whatever it is in the economy, which have been impacted because of stuff that has happened at the small and medium scale enterprises. Forget the informal sector, forget the daily wage earner, the shopkeeper who would run a tea stall every day, and or somebody like that. So really the impact is very large, and it is also therefore in the interest of the larger sector to link with its suppliers, which very often are the medium and small scale enterprises. Because if they don't function, the large industry is also going to be hamstrung. It may not show up today, but it's going to show up tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. That was very well enumerated. So first message from Naresh Trehan. He's trying desperately, not able to log on. He's tried from an iPad. He's tried from a laptop. Doesn't work. So I've just told him to take it easy. If you can, hop in because we have only 30 minutes left to go. If not, then we have two outstanding speakers here who will hold the floor as they are doing right now. So Preetha, we have often said that this is a sector ripe for growth. But as in anything else in life, the big jumps, big leaps forward come with innovation. And world over, we recognize a lot of the innovation is coming from startups, clearly from not from the giant organizations. Of course, many of the startups get acquired by the big organizations. But the culture of encouraging innovation, encouraging failure, telling people to carry on an experiment, whether it works or not. India has developed this as a new culture. We are the second largest startup nation in the world. But for some reason, on the health front, on the health devices, medical devices, healthcare, health research, we are still behind, even within the startup universe. Why do you think that's the case? And do you think anything needs to be done to change that?
So Sunil, this is an area which I think all of us are excited about, and we'd like to focus because we know that once we get it right in India, just like pharma did, you can be an answer for the rest of the world, and I think it's not too far away. Some of the things which we've also, just like you, we've been trying to see, can we invest into startups? Can we look at medical devices? What I see is that this whole, the route of the permissions, the regulations, it's a bit hard. You need to know the right person in ICMR. You need to push it through this CSIR. All these multiple bodies which are there. The permissions seem to be like a big challenge. Then access to capital, while people fund and there's private equity or there are all these. The cost of literally going to a bank is still much higher than, let's say, you had a startup in California. They would get bank and funding at much cheaper rates, and the returns would be much higher. So I think if we could find an answer for that, we will see the sector flourish. But having said that, healthcare startup, I think we've seen like a huge number coming up. Will some of them become, unicorns? I'm hoping they will, because they should. Also, data protection, again, is, it's a big point. We have to be very cognizant and very careful of that. But a lot of the multinationals want to fund or want to jump into India or want to be part of, ecosystems like ours where we're really touching millions of lives. And then this big question comes about that: how do you access, or where do you own the data? Where does it sit? And I think the right answers to that make it much more, useful and important, because that will also answer some of this whole startup system. So the startups are two kinds. There's one which is really piggybacking on all the data which is, so-called available. And there's another one which is actually providing care to a patient. So I think both these have to be thought through really well and supported.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Only I have a slight difference with you. One, we can't just say that there is a problem. We have to go back to the government and give them note after note after note, tell them what needs to change. Second, risk funding is now available in India. You don't have to go to banks for this money, and you should not go to banks. And you're right, Indian bank money is too expensive on a relative basis. Even in real terms, it is expensive money. So this has to be risk capital coming from venture funds, angel networks, and the like, and for larger entities from private equity funds. And that is something that we all have to encourage. The biggest shift I've seen is private offices, private wealth managers, and family offices shifting to invest in this area. And I think that is the most impactful change that has taken place in recent times. And if they see an opportunity here, both to do the right thing and to do good and be good, I think that gives them a unique opportunity to invest in an area where there is real return and at the same time massive public good. So it is a true win-win-win for all concerned.
And so you know that space well, so I'm glad you're saying it because great advice.
No, and I strongly feel that that's an area which needs to be encouraged, and it can only benefit the entire nation in so many ways.
Preetha, maybe Sunil is letting out some of his own secrets.
I think so.
You're right.
I'm in India right now. So I'm before we actually wind up now, because Dr. Trehan has sent a message again. He's still trying, still having trouble logging on.
No worries.
So in that case, we shall. I thought in case he's able to, we might extend a little bit. But since he's not, we then have 6 minutes and a bit available to us. Instead of my asking a question, would any of you have a question of the other one, or a comment you'd like to make before we wind up?
So, I think one thing I'd like to say, we've all talked about, is that there is a need for much closer working between private sector, government, and also, and of course, the medical community, but also the citizens at large. Because at the end of the day, we must remember that we still, as individuals, as citizens, have to be responsible. So, what was disturbing is when you see everybody went through a very harrowing experience in COVID-2, wave 2. And, almost everybody that I know was impacted directly or indirectly. They've either lost somebody, or people they have know very well have suffered. But when the government starts removing the lockdown, which we all have been asking for, by the way, you suddenly see these throngs of people. So there's nothing wrong with the throngs of people. What is wrong is that they are without masks. There is no semblance of social distancing. And, we've all been witness to this. So I think I'd like to use the platform to also say that each of us need to behave responsibly. I have started going to office, let us say, and I'm going 5 days a week. But when there is somebody in the room, I wear a mask, even though I am double vaccinated and perhaps the other person as well. So this is one thing that I think we need to do as a nation to do this. Otherwise, all efforts would come to naught. The second quick point I want to make is, we didn't talk about it as much on this program, is about the economic sides of it. We touched upon it. It is very essential that given our population, given our masses, we need to have specific programs, and the government is doing that. I'm not saying they're not. The food that they have put out, etc. But we need to do even more in terms of trying to bring back these jobs, trying to bring back sectors. We don't have time to talk about the specifics here, but that is the other important message that I think we need to recognize.
I will try and come back at this time after Preetha's comment, because the question would be about whether monetary or fiscal tools of the government are more effective, and what do they have in their war chest that they can use more of now. Preetha, over to you.
But Sunil, I just wanted to highlight, one of the programs which we managed to do in the Nilgiris. Nilgiris is a district of Tamil Nadu, and they have done 82% of the tribal population. And it's not as if, we have a hospital in Nilgiris. But what was done is, there's a fantastic collective. There happens to be a lady, but that's okay. And having said that, working together, they first convinced the tribal leaders to take the first jab, because there are a lot of tribes there, and they could lead by example. And then the NGOs were onboarded to come and help with the vaccination. Private sector came, if the government wasn't supplying fast enough, then private sector kind of stepped in. But to me, that's a success story. And the same thing happened, in the district where we come from in Andhra Pradesh. We do a program called Total Health, and we respond, and it's part of our CSR. But 200,000 people come under the 200,000 people come under all vaccinated.
Oh, looks like we got Dr. Trehan finally.
Yeah, so I'm saying that because these things are possible, and vaccine hesitancy is directly proportional to economic recovery and adopting these safety norms. So unless we get that vaccine hesitancy, and for a little while maybe be tough on it, we are still heading for a problem. So I think we need to figure that piece out.
Yep.
Hello.
So good to see Dr. Trehan here. Welcome, Doctor.
Hi, Doc. How are you? Good to see you.
Thank you for joining. So, if it is okay, Rekha, we will extend the session by a little bit since Doc has joined.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
I
that.
think Frank has already given us permission to do that. So
Great.
go ahead. Welcome, Dr. Trehan.
Thank you. Thank you so
So,
much.
Dr. Trehan, I guess all of us have got so used to doing these programs that we now we stopped preparing or logging in early for these, as most organizers ask us, and we do have sometimes these challenges at the last minute.
Yeah,
So,
this is the first time it happened like this, but anyway, you learn.
Yep. So, so Doc, tell me, the second wave seems to have a fat tail still going on in places like Kerala and Maharashtra, while it's kind of tapered off in most of the parts of the city, most of the part of the country. We even talked of probably an explosive situation in Uttarakhand because of the Kumbh Mela which took place. But fortunately, while there were many infections, but not the kind of number in Uttarakhand itself. So what do you think is going on? Is there any learning for us here for future?
See, Sunil, to tell you the truth, we all get on the TV and programs like this and act like we know it all. The truth is that nobody really knows. This is one of those viruses which is very unpredictable and has not followed any pattern that we have predicted. The point is, when does mutation happen? Mutation happens when people get infected and the virus is replicating itself inside the body. It spins off certain variants depending on what it is sensing as a danger or something like that. Okay. We don't know the exact mechanism, but that's the difference. So the point then comes up that will we have enough people infected? It has a life of its own and it will keep multiplying as we go along. Okay. So now, if you look at it historically, what happened in the Spanish flu pandemic? There was a big second wave, then there were smaller, a couple of waves, and suddenly 2 years later it disappeared. Can we hope for something like that? We don't know. But the point is, today it is still following the same pattern as the Spanish flu, because the distance or a gap between the first and second wave was 32 weeks. And in India, it's 32 weeks. Okay.
Correct.
Also, the second wave was much higher, although I don't think it was 4 times higher like it happened in India. But then we helped the wave to move along by doing all our things that we did. Okay. Now you're asking me this question about the fat tail. So, Kerala is perplexing to everybody in the sense that they have vaccinated a lot. They have, because a small scattered population, they have been under pressure to contain it, and still the numbers keep rising. Now, also we know that there is the new variants that they have found from there may be the cause behind all this, and that the RO factor is so high that these people are not, it's just going through the full population right now. That's what it seems like. Now, this is a race. This is a race between our ability to vaccinate and the virus to mutate. Excuse me. Now, what is encouraging? One is that the latest ICMR fever survey says that there may be 60% seropositivity in the country. If that's the case, we have hope that even if we reach 60% of vaccination,
Actually, you're saying 2/3, more than that. Yeah.
So now what it means is there is a modelation about the number of vaccines we can do per day. So it says this model is called Shakti, And you can pick any model, some of them, most of them are not 100% accurate. But it says that if we can do 50 lakh vaccinations a day, then we have a possibility of whatever the wave is going to be blunted by 25+%. And if we can get to 70 lakhs a day, it will be even more. Or maybe 90, it may disappear. But that's not happening. But we can surely aim for 70. Now, I was talking to somebody last night who's the horse's mouth, and he said that, look, August, we should be able to get between 12 and 14 crores. That means we can reach 70, close to 60, 70 a day. That is what we really need to. So if August happens 14, 15, we expect 17, 18 in the following month, and that's where we go from 50 to 70. But the good part is that we have, between the government services and the private sector, we do have enough capacity to go up to 1 crore a day. So ultimately, the key lies in how much we can vaccinate, because it's already proven that people who have been vaccinated, no matter where they are, even in Kerala, that it is a mild form rather than getting into the hospital. So these are the facts which we have to struggle with.
Yeah, that's been seen. Data has shown that in the US, in the UK, in India, and multiple other countries, that the people who are severely getting infected in recent times, 95% of those who have not been vaccinated, and of the mortality, only 0.01% is those who had been vaccinated. So the vaccination so far is proving itself to be effective. That's for sure. So I have a question for both Preetha and you. Do you therefore think we should accelerate the process of going down age, because the young kids will go out as the restrictions are eased off? They will go out more. Schools will open. Should we go down to 12 years? Should we go down to 6 years? When do you think it should happen, and why? Preetha, you want to take that?
I think Dr. Trehan, because clinically, is it safe for children? There's still that worry among the parents. So I think
No, this is assuming, Preetha, you can't give it unless it's safe, okay? This is presuming all trials have been done and it's approved. Okay? I'm just talking about.
I think 100% needs to be done, Sunil, because I think they are the ones who are right now the most vulnerable because it's not done. And that lot needs to be targeted and it has to be given. Efficacy, of course, safety, of course, but I think global data showing that it's safe enough. And children getting infected is definitely there. In fact, I had a problem in my own home. My baby granddaughter was COVID positive. She's only 6 months old. So I think the worry and the concern is there. So I think the sooner we get it done, the better.
Yeah. So, Doc?
So, the thing to add on to that is that in the last wave, the second wave, where lots of children did get infected and there is a lot of seropositivity in children, that means that they were either asymptomatic or they were minimally asymptomatic, and we did not see much. But we did see in the post-COVID phase what is called the multi-organ inflammatory syndrome. That was seen, but fortunately it responded very well to immunoglobulin therapy. So what we are thinking today, and this is part of the discussions that we are having in the NTF, the National Task Force of Supreme Court, is to say that like we got caught without enough, or we did not have enough pharmaceuticals available when we wanted them for different stages, that we should be better prepared in case the third wave actually is significant, but we should have all the supplies available. So that's the concentration right now with the pharmaceutical world, that we should have enough immune globulin, we must have enough of amphotericin and remdesivir and tocilizumab, and dexamethasone. Dexamethasone is the easiest to manufacture. There are enough manufacturers in there and they are ramping up. But the remdesivir also is now, I don't think will be a problem. Toci still may be. But there is a gut feeling also along with all the data that comes in. That feeling is that I don't expect, or we collectively don't expect, that the third wave is going to be as devastating as the second wave. So that means if we survive the second wave, we should be okay for the third wave by way of capacities, by way of therapeutics, by way of knowledge, and by way of physicians available to treat them at different levels. So I think we can be prepared. Now the question is, when will it going to happen? And one of the things that we really need to look at is that early sensing, containment in that particular region wherever this thing happens, and isolating it, like the Bhilwara model that we keep talking about, where one DC in Bhilwara sealed the whole district, and the numbers came down crashing, and they never had that kind of that infection rate even now. So the point basically is, if we are proactive in sensing the emergence of a virus or a variant, and coupled with a strong administration that will take quick action, we can contain it even if third wave comes. And if we can contain it, we can still continue with our normal or quasi-normal lives and economic activity, so that it doesn't become devastating for our country.
So there has been, of course, speculation that children will get infected and infected much more this time. Part of it for obvious reasons, because they're not being vaccinated. The adult population is. Do you believe we are equipped well enough if it does actually impact children more? Is our system equipped well enough?
So if I read your question right, the basic thing is, one, the reason why we are saying children, and you alluded to it, that a large proportion of the adult population will, because they are vaccinated, will not be the host for the virus, and the virus is going to look for hosts which are unprotected, and that's the children. That's the theory behind it. There is wide-ranging view on it, whether it will happen or not, but the point is, where are the super spreaders for children? Super spreader for children are only two: school and sports events. Otherwise, it's controlled between. Now, the children are suffering, no question. It's going to be almost 2 years by the end of this year that they have been isolated. And the fact is that it takes a toll, because human interaction at that age, like any other age, but more so at that age, is a very important ingredient of growing up. So that's why we are seeing too many children becoming isolationist and getting into their own video screens and reading and all that, not losing interest. Now that has to come to an end, but I think that now sitting in July, we should not get impatient. Maybe another 2-3 months to 6 months is the maximum. I think we'll have to isolate the children. As the vaccination program rolls out, we should be able to return and colleges and all that as ASAP. So I think that very important when we talk about life versus livelihood. I think children life applies, not livelihood. At the other end of the spectrum, where the working force is, you need to get them healthy and running and protected. That's what our concentration is right now. But when the vaccine arrives for children, we have the capacity to roll it out very fast, but it depends on the production capacity. Say now co-vaccine is the new hope for children, and there is a lot of sort of optimism about its appearance soon. And if that happens, we can roll out. I mean, don't forget, it will only be first from 12 to 18. And the population to be vaccinated in 12 to 18 is relatively, I mean, as compared to the rest of the country, our adult population is relatively small. So we should be able to roll it out very quickly.
More than the population of many countries. So
yes, that's true.
And I think
from that country, everything is used stymied because of that. No question.
Exactly.
So US is experiencing for the first time a drop in population of 1.1. So I don't know what will happen in India, but I hope not that this is not the modality of birth control or population control.
So Harsh, let me ask you the last question. What do you think will be behavioral change that has taken place during COVID which will remain permanent?
Okay, that's a very important question. I'll tell you, medicine will see a whole new shift of things to come. And we have Preetha here. Apollo is also very,
I'd
very.
like each of you to take a stab at this question. After Doc finishes, and then Harsh and Preetha.
Yeah, Preetha will know. So one, of course, it is to the benefit of the patient more than anybody else. That the normal cycle used to be the patient would come, travel 3, 4, 5, 700 kilometers to get a first consultation with the doctor, then learn what they need, and then go back and come back. I mean, today, 70% who don't need to come to the hospital or a doctor's office don't need to come. And we can treat them quite successfully, or at least give them good advice, or give them supplementary advice to their local physician. Second thing is that ones who need to come to the hospital are already prepared for what they are coming for. It is cost saving, human resource saving. They can plan their whole life properly. So side benefits are huge. Now, of course, then if you will take the platform, you don't need a specialist in every ICU. And also the future.
Oh.
So many things like that will happen. And I'll stop here so Preetha can add on. Her knowledge is much more about it.
Preetha?
No, I think point of care has shifted. Before, we were almost like an edifice. Hospitals were temples, and everybody would come to worship at that temple and at that altar. And that has changed, and now I think the point of care, the most important, the center of focus now has become the person who needs it. You call it customer, we call it the patient. So there's a huge shift in that direction. So everything we do in design has to now be around the customer, and that's why you see that the whole digital ecosystem has become so important as against an infrastructural ecosystem, and that's changed. Diagnostics have changed, point of care has shifted, and you have quicker, faster turnaround times. You can do a whole panel with just a drop of blood, and that's going to happen. So I think these things have changed, and then the devices. You can monitor so many things with a device. So, and people, because of that, have become so much more conscious.